Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. Thank you all so much. That's an amazing welcome. I hope you're as happy after my remarks. I think you will be. It is such a blessing for me to be with you all today. This is a special gathering where we can all be together to talk about an enormous threat to the world and to a freedom-loving people. It's truly an honor. Since I last spoke to you, Ibrahim Raisi was formally installed as Iran's latest so-called president. And you are rightly gathered here today at this conference with the theme of demanding that he be held accountable for what happened in 1988, the massacre of political prisoners inside of Iran. And I want each of you to know today that I join with you in your cause. I came to know Raisi when I was the CIA director. He should be prosecuted. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next year, but we should prosecute him now. And of course, I'll talk more about this, but I support a free Iran. Bless you for staying in the fight. Make no mistake, Ibrahim Raisi himself, personally, is responsible for the 1988 mass execution of thousands of Iranian political prisoners. Names of over 5,000 have been published. The bodies of these brave men and women were dumped in unmarked graves. And because Iran has never, and likely under this regime will never, allowed an investigation of these killings, we do not know the true number of Iranians who were murdered. But it is almost certainly more than the 5,000 list of names that we have. Your actions, our actions, supporting our love of the Iranian people must begin by holding Raisi accountable for his crimes against humanity. Remember that he was not an advisor. He wasn't a foot soldier. He was an executioner. And I know that there are those in the audience who have family that were killed in Raisi's massacre. Some of you have loved ones and friends currently imprisoned, in Evan imprisoned, and elsewhere inside of Iran. And some who've had loved ones simply disappear or worse. None of us, will ever forget any of them, and we will pray for you and for each of them as well. You know, this character Raisi is exactly who Khamenei wants as president. Someone who will do his bidding. Someone willing to brutalize and slaughter the Iranian people at his command. This is not moving forward. It is moving backwards. It is only those who are resisting, both inside and outside, who provide the hope for Iran. And that's why this gathering, what you are doing here today, is so important. You know, the contrast between a government that serves its people rather than subjugates them is incredibly stark. We can see it. That should be all of our inspiration for freedom for the Iranian people. It's been almost 8 months now since I left office as a Secretary of State. And when we left, Iran was more isolated and the regime was weaker than ever. However, I must say I've watched the events of the past weeks and months, and I worry. I know the Iranian people do not want that. It's why we have to keep pressure on our representatives to forgo renegotiating the nuclear deal and avoid paying Iran ransom to either re-enter that deal or because they believe it would be a show of goodwill. Goodwill is not something a terrorist regime understands. We must also ensure that advancements in the Iranian nuclear program are strictly monitored and action taken, whether that's by the United States, other Western nations, or by the IAEA, to ensure they don't just run out the clock on a path, not only to a nuclear weapon, but to a full nuclear program. I must say, over the last year or so of the pandemic, the Iranian regime has used the coronavirus to continue crackdown on its own citizens. These actions are not only ignorant, but malevolent. They've used the pandemic to extinguish uprisings and subdue the Iranian people. This is totally unacceptable. As Americans, we know supporting the general welfare of our citizens is the duty of government, and to subjugate them is horrific. And while we know the Iranian regime doesn't value freedom, we should at least expect the United States to value that freedom. And yet we know that the more a government attempts to strengthen its hold over the people of Iran, the weaker it will become. This is certainly the case today. Protests spurred by water shortages erupted in over half of the country's provinces, and protests have taken place in Araz, in Tabriz, in Tehran, and in Isfahan, and other cities all across Iran. These protesters, these amazing freedom-loving people, have shown considerable resilience and bravery in resisting the regime. And I know that in the end, the Iranian people will have a secular, democratic, and non-nuclear republic. The actions in 1979 were, of course, a key turning point. To understand Iran and its rightful place in history, we must unpack what happened in 1979. I think it's why Iran will never return to rule by a dictatorial Shah or theocratic regime. This fight is real.